Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome back.
To what?
I don't know what that means.
Perfect.
I told myself I was going to stop making the very silly and not especially funny, but I don't know what that means joke at the top of every episode. So, progress here.
But you still brought it up.
I did, but I didn't make the joke.
All right.
So,
Baby steps.
very, very baby steps.
Cool. All right. Well, hi, I'm Jen.
And I'm Graham.
And what are we talking about today?
Meltdowns.
Hey.
Yeah. So, little aside to the listeners, I didn't realize that while I was dying of the plague that Jen had made an update about my condition and about the fact that we, still existed and everything. And in that episode, promised that we were going to do the Meltdowns one next. And then she brought it up to me a couple of times, and I didn't really notice it. I think that subconsciously I'm resistant to this one because for reasons that we'll get into, it's hard to talk about meltdowns. So I think that I might have been like, I don't really want to do that because it's not, some of the other ones are kind of fun. This one is not so much.
It'll be fun, she said.
Generally it is. I like being here with you. I like having a conversation and hanging out and maybe feeling like we help people sometimes.
All right. So, we'll see if we need a drink after we're done.
I don't expect it to be that bad, but I usually don't turn down a drink. So,
He said.
We'll see.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, as you are the person with the plan typically, what do you got to kick us off?
Plan is a very loose term here.
Look, it doesn't appear much elsewhere in our lives, so I'm gonna fucking take full advantage while we have one that you concocted.
Yeah, meltdowns. At their most basic, a meltdown is kind of what it sounds like. You hit a threshold. For autistic people, it's typically stimulation or some sort of emotional buildup in response to something, and you just kind of blow up. This is another one of those topics where it's very much like we're the same as everybody else. Like everybody has experienced this where like shit just gets to be too much and you kind of lose it. And the difference, as is common in a lot of these comparisons that I make between neurotypical folks and neurodivergent folks, is for us it tends to be a little bit more intense maybe, and it maybe has a more pronounced effect. So as I said, a meltdown is kind of a response to stimulus, and its stimulation can mean, in this case, like sensory stimulation, lights, sounds, people around you, whatever. It can be emotional stimulation, things like being frustrated. That's a really common one for me, so I get stuck on it. Is like if I am frustrated for whatever reason, I have a really difficult time expressing that in like kind of an effective way, and so it just like sits behind my eyeballs and builds and builds and builds, and then stuff explodes. And so, again, this is very similar to how it would be for neurotypical folks. I think that some of y'all can express those kinds of things a little bit more effectively. Like it's easier for you guys to yell or to, pace around, do whatever, and to kind of deal with it before it gets to the point where it's like kind of an autistic grade meltdown, right? So
I can see that. One of the things that I'm not gonna say like I don't understand, but like sometimes I think when like in our past experience, like I think the first time I ever saw you have one, I was like, is he having a panic attack or what the actual fuck is happening right now? Like, are you mad at me? Are you freaking out? Or like what, I guess?
Yeah. There is a very frequent comparison drawn to panic attacks. I have seen it said by several autistic people that I know that like I thought I was having panic attacks until I found out I was autistic. And then I found out that they were actually meltdowns. So for those of you who are unfortunate enough to be familiar either firsthand or immediately secondhand with what a panic attack is and how it works, it's a lot like that. So for me, my experience of meltdowns, and I don't know specifically what you're talking, like what specific instance, we've been together almost 5 years, so there have been a few. But yeah, I think, to an outside observer, it might be kind of scary, honestly. It's got to be really like weird, especially like I don't know, I'm fairly like even keeled a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not like an especially expressive or like a loud person most of the time and whatever. And so
Shocking, said the listeners.
for me to suddenly go from like seeming super chill to like yelling at you, or like pacing and like, I don't know, got blood dripping from my hands because I'm like really picking super badly or I'm like scratching,
I'm glad that you clarified that because it sounds like you like ripped a person to shreds.
No, I just spontaneously. It's like what's the lizard, the like horned lizard or whatever, that its defense mechanism is it ratchets up its blood pressure so high that it shoots blood out of its eyes.
Jesus, I don't know.
Yeah, horned lizard, I think is what it is, or a horned toad or something. I don't know, but there's this animal, and that's one of its defense mechanisms is that like a predator comes at it and it just goes like and then squirts blood everywhere.
I've said before, I wish I could just not spontaneously, but like make my nose bleed on demand because that's a really good out for a conversation.
Yeah. Especially if you could do it just like totally stone faced, just
100%. Like, oh no, I have to leave now.
Just you're just sitting there, and then all of a sudden like blood starts trickling, and they're like, "Oh my god, are you okay?" And you're like, "What? What's?"
No, I must step away.
Something on my face.
Sorry.
Yeah. So as some of the listeners know, I did not know that I was autistic until very recently. 2000, I'm going to say 2021, I think was right around there. But at that point, we'd been together for a while already.
Mm-hmm.
And for almost my entire life, like I can look back long before we ever met, just over the course of my entire life, I can look back at specific moments that I know now in retrospect were meltdowns. But at the time, I had no explanation for it. My dad, who I believe was autistic, and was like an explosively angry person, which I now realize were his meltdowns, I think that I just thought like I inherited that kind of behavior from him, where I learned that kind of behavior from him. And so this is one of those places where you find out late in life that you are neurodivergent in some way, and it gives context to your entire life in a way that's like mostly great, because now you're like, oh, I wasn't just like a defective person, or I wasn't just like an asshole or whatever. Like there's a reason why all these things happened, but also there's some like grief that comes along with it. And you're like, if I had known this at the time,
yeah.
But yeah, in the context of you and I together, like, I think that our personality types don't necessarily like mesh immediately. Do you know what I mean? A lot of people that I have dated in the past, I have either done the thing where like I minimize myself to the point where their personality takes over the whole relationship, or we've just been like very similar people, and so we wouldn't have kind of like, I don't know, personality clashes or whatever like that. And I think that you and I had some more of that. Some of it having to do with my becoming aware that I was a person and having boundaries, being able to just speak up for myself in a way that I didn't in the past.
Yeah. Well, and also part of, I don't know, I feel like my work trying to be a better partner, like in the later part of my life, is hearing my other half's wants and needs and like where they come from, so that like I'm not being the person who takes over the relationship or, just assumes that you feel the way I do about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in the beginning, honestly, that was a weird learning curve and even source of contention in some of those instances. But like it was good because I think if I hadn't been the kind of person to challenge you and be like, why are you acting this way? Like we wouldn't have had all those conversations and even these conversations on the podcast now. So it's been interesting.
Absolutely. And I think that there was never a point where you looked me in the face and were like, you're autistic or whatever. But I genuinely do not think that without having had the experience of our relationship, especially early on, I do not know that I would have come around to it as quickly as I have. So I think that just being with you has been instrumental in my getting to this point, in my like learning this about myself.
That's interesting. I've never heard you say that before.
I don't know that I really had realized it until you said that. So, I mean, like anything, it's a series of moments, and mm-hmm. I think that because I have such trouble with the passage of time, I don't necessarily like, like I said, we've been together for almost 5 years and it kind of doesn't feel like it to me. And partly that's just because I still enjoy spending time with you. I still like to be with you,
I should hope so.
and I like who you are as a person. But part of that is just like, maybe it wasn't, like I can't tell the difference between 5 years and something that isn't 5 years. So like I don't have that kind of perspective to be able to look at the timeline of my figuring this out about myself and then like compare that to the timeline of like when I was with you and kind of how things were going early in our relationship and go, oh, there's a correlation. Again, until you bring it up, just talking about like kind of your growth journey, whatever, early on and everything, and then my being able to kind of superimpose my figuring myself out against that context. Suddenly I'm like, actually, yeah, you probably have been more significant to that process than I think maybe either of us realized. So thank you.
I'm not going to say you're welcome because I don't feel like I did anything, but I'm happy to be here for you, my love.
So here you go. Real growth and real discovery happening in real time on I Don't Know What That Means, the Double Empathy podcast. So yeah, no, I know that there were meltdowns early on, and I know now that that's what they were. For the listeners, our relationship didn't really start in a sort of a traditional way.
Graham was a mail order bride.
It's true. It's true. I was imported from Malta. I probably wouldn't be so pale if I were from Malta. So the first time that we ever met was at a mutual friend's party. I think we've talked about this. We met at a Christmas party, and we kind of hit it off, but not to the degree that, like, I don't know. I think I left thinking like, oh, it would be cool if I saw that lady again, but it was never like, I need to get her number or whatever else. Like, we didn't make any plans to keep in touch, things like that. And then a few months went by, and she was looking for someone to go with her to do open mics. And I was like, oh shit, I'll go do that. I don't think that we had the same notion of like what we were going to do. Like, I feel like you were looking for like someone who was also going to like perform, actually do open mic shit. And I was just like, that sounds like a fun thing to go do, is just like watch people be bad at comedy but I was like, oh yeah, like she was cool. We had a good time at that party, whatever. So like, let's go hang out. And we had a great time, and we hung out all that weekend. And then we didn't see each other at all. I don't know that we even talked in like the intervening week. And then the next weekend we hung out again.
Yeah, you came to an improv show with me because you're a hero. I was not performing, everyone, just so you know.
Oh yeah, I very vaguely remember that. Yeah. Okay. So it was something like that. And then that's kind of how the relationship started. The first time that we ever hung out ourselves was March 6th, 2020. So then a week goes by, and now it's the middle of March 2020, and people are talking about this virus that's going around. And so, yeah, COVID hit hard, lockdowns hit, and there was very early on in the whole lockdown thing, there was the concept of like the bubble, like the people that you're like allowed to interact with safely. And Jen and I kind of decided like, you're the only other person in the world that I can hang out with, basically. And so we started to hang out on a weekendly basis. And we always had a great time, and then things just sort of progressed from there. So yeah, we didn't have kind of like a traditional sort of meet cute moment or whatever. At the risk of talking the entire time about like our relationship, we had a very distinct kind of relationship dynamic, you and I, to anything that I've ever been in before. And so I think that having a relationship that had some air in it, that had some space in it, gave me a lot of time to kind of think about myself in the context of everything, but specifically, around relationships. And I think that was also a really like helpful thing in terms of figuring out this about myself. But, we would hang out, and our relationship early on was like very like intensely punctuated, because we would have the whole weekend, and we would spend every minute together on the weekend. It was great. And then we just wouldn't see each other, and we would like barely talk for the week intervening.
Yeah, because we both work. Well, for a minute, I didn't have a job, but like we were both working from home, and like, yeah, I was like, well, I didn't hopefully go touch any package on my porch that had COVID on it, so probably Graham can hang out this week.
Yeah, and I didn't. I think the listeners are also shocked to hear this. I didn't have much of a life anyway. Like, I didn't go anywhere anyway. So.
Well, I mean, we couldn't.
Right, but I mean, like even if it weren't lockdown, I wasn't doing anything. So that's a thing. But Yeah, so we kind of had that. We had some like inbuilt space in our relationship early on that I wasn't really familiar with, and that I don't know probably gave us both, I think, some kind of like room to consider who we were as people and who we were in relationships and everything else, and just ultimately led to this. I don't remember what the question was. I don't remember the
How's a
overarching thing.
meltdown different from a panic attack?
25 minutes later. Um, okay, yeah. So they are very similar. I think that they both tend to kind of come from the same place, like a an overabundance of stimulation, or a thing that's really common for meltdowns. And this sounds so silly, but like uh, short notice changes in routine are so hard to deal with for me, and it can be something super minor, like especially if we're gonna go somewhere, if we were gonna, I don't know, go see a movie and we didn't buy tickets beforehand for whatever reason, and we got there and it was sold out. That would be like really hard for me to process because I've already got in my head that like this is how the day is gonna go, and now that's not how the day is gonna go, and it introduces a ton of uncertainty, and now I'm freaking out. Um, But I mean, meltdowns can express themselves in kind of really the same ways that panic attacks can. We're sort of like trapped animals sometimes. Blood pressure goes up. Some of us might be. I've known people who are self-destructive, who will like cut or scratch or like damage themselves um, as part of meltdowns. They can be sort of like emotional outbursts, the kind of things that you might think of as like a tantrum
Hmm.
in people, like yelling and screaming, and as you brought up before, like uncharacteristic behavior, uncharacteristically angry or violent, um, or even just like a lot behavior. Especially again from someone like me who typically is not like that. To suddenly for me to be like very energetic, and like highly expressive, overly expressive. I feel like where a panic attack is usually, in my limited knowledge of them, I think a panic attack is usually like you get into like fight or flight mode, I guess, and a meltdown is the same. I don't want to say bigger because it sounds like there's like a competition and it's not. But I think like they do tend to be very similar. I think that meltdowns tend to last longer than panic attacks in a lot of cases. Um, and I think one of the really kind of key differences about it is that an autistic meltdown is not conscious. There is no part of that you're aware of. Whereas a panic attack, I think sometimes you can kind of have that like one step back perspective that like, okay, I'm panicking, whereas with a meltdown, it's blind. It's like a completely instinctual thing. And like I said, it's the result of your brain is overflowing and it just like hits the dump valve button.
I guess that's interesting because, like, I've only like been around people when they've had panic attacks, and like I want to say like every time like they've said I'm having a
Mhm.
panic attack, and like it might have been through like gasping, crying, but like they still like knew. So that's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that that's probably one of the really significant differences between the two. I think it's a lot easier to have the awareness of panic attacks than it is like an autistic meltdown. And that's not to say that we can't have that awareness. And actually, one of the points that I did want to bring up is that there is a point for me, and hopefully this is the same for everyone else who deals with this bullshit. There is a point in a meltdown where the like fog starts to break, where I start to sort of like regain, because when I'm in a meltdown, um, I'm not in control. I'm not consciously doing any of the things that are going on, right? So if I'm pacing, if I'm yelling, if I'm scratching at myself, whatever it might be, I'm not choosing to do any of that. That's all completely autonomic. Like I said, your brain kind of hits the dump valve button, but in this case, it's trying everything it can. It's trying everything it knows how to do to just like release this pressure.
Hmm.
Um, and so there comes a point where the fog starts to lift a little bit, and I kind of come back to myself. And um, that's usually the point where that's kind of like the turning point in a meltdown for me, is that like I realize where I am and what's happening, and it doesn't end right there. And that's, to me, this is one of the worst parts of the meltdown, is when I'm in it and I know that I'm in it, but now I'm like consciously aware of the thing. Like I remember being in the like unconscious part of the meltdown.
That makes me think of like sleep paralysis.
Yeah, actually. Yeah, like I said, it's like an unconscious kind of blind panic thing as a person who also suffers from sleep paralysis. That like that's actually a really good comparison, I think, especially to that moment where I kind of come to myself a little bit, where now I'm aware of this thing that's happening to me, but like I'm still not, I can't shut it off. I can't, with sleep paralysis, I can't force myself awake. With a
Mhm.
meltdown, I can't just be like, okay, we're done now. There is one pretty specific meltdown. We went to an all day music festival at one point, in like 21 or 22, or maybe it was earlier than that. I don't remember. And this was still like well during when COVID was the thing that people took seriously. So just being outside in the summer when it was like hot as balls all day and drinking all day long and being surrounded by a ton of people, which is like a hard thing for me to process anyway on its own, outside the context of like there being a global pandemic and like some of these people are going to be dead, like soon, and I might be dead as a result of some of these people soon, and so like there's a lot of that. Plus, just like loud noises, it was a music festival, and so all of these things kind of combine, and I was fine, 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 and then I wasn't. And that's exactly how it is with meltdowns for me. I can't tell. There's no like gauge I can look at, that's going to tell me I'm at 90% capacity or whatever. I'm fine until suddenly I'm not. Which is one of the most frustrating things about them, is that like they're really, really hard to predict. Sometimes I'm able to have kind of the awareness to be like, okay, I am overstimulated right now in my current situation, and like I maybe need to take a step back, and I can sort of ward these things off sometimes. But sometimes I don't, especially like I said, if I've been drinking. But yeah, so I was fine, I was fine, I was fine, and then I wasn't. I remember we were leaving. That was the thing that was the shittiest about it, was that it was like fine right up until we were leaving. And that's when it really hit. And I was just like, we're in the middle of downtown and I don't know that area at all. And I was just like losing my mind, like just like a trapped animal. I was just like pacing around like streets, trying to find street signs that I could barely read in this like blind panic, thinking, I don't know where I am. I don't know where I had lost you guys. I don't know how that happened.
Here's my perspective. Graham left me at the music festival.
Yeah, and I can see that it would.
Because we couldn't find you anywhere. I was trying to get a hold of you.
Yeah. Because I was not functionally conscious, so I was just like running around like street corners and stuff, trying to get some kind of semblance of like knowing anything at that point. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know where any of my friends were and my people were, like how I was going to get anywhere from where I was. And I'm just, my heart's racing and I'm like trembling, and my brain's always going at 100 miles an hour to start with, but it was like the throttle was stuck open. Yeah, it's a bad time. And then finally somehow we managed to get like, I managed to find you guys, or your Uber found me or something. I don't really know.
I made you literally read street signs to me.
Yeah, that sounds right. I've had that meltdown a couple of times where I had to like get somebody on the phone and be like, I need you to like Google map me somewhere or something, which is really a fun thing to have to do as a a grown human being. I remember like the car ride back home, I don't know, half an hour probably. It was fairly far from like Midtown to where we live. I remember just being in the car and like like pressing myself up against the door and trying to just like shrink myself into a single atom and disappear, because I was just like terrified and completely overwhelmed, and like, and then there was a moment where I was like, why am I like this? And that was kind of that moment of clarity where I was able to be like, what? Like, what is going, like, this is an outsized response to being like a little bit lost and a little bit confused, I guess. Like, this feels like an unusually disproportionate response to that. What the hell? And I think that's the point where it had kind of started to like crest, and fall off. And then comes one of the really cool parts about the backside of an autistic meltdown, where now I am suddenly aware of how I've been for the last, X amount of time. And I feel like biggest asshole there has ever been about it. And I'm just like crushed with this like guilt and remorse and just like beating myself up for being terrible to people and for like being completely irrational, you know, and all of that, and just feeling absolutely awful about it on top of like still feeling physically awful. Um yeah, that's a good time. That's a really fun part about it.
Everybody has those moments. Like, there's like the classic, everybody knows the anxiety of like if you have a big night out and maybe things get fuzzy and you're like, oh, the next day everyone hates me, I have acted like an ass.
Mhm.
Like, it's not an unfamiliar feeling for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah. And then for me, because I'm late diagnosed and I always just thought like there's something wrong with me, you know, um, it's very easy for me to drop into that kind of self-recrimination space and just be like, everyone does hate me for legitimate reason because I have 40 years of telling myself that, you know.
Yeah. But like, so that is the first time I ever remember like seeing that happen. And at the time it was very much like, what the actual fuck? Why would he just like ditch all of us? Because that was our perspective.
Yeah.
But then like as soon as I could actually like speak to you on the phone, that's when I was able to like kind of like cover the mouthpiece and be like, I think he's having a fucking panic attack or something. Like, I don't know what's going on, but like, he's not right.
Yeah.
And so like that, even that little bit of like context like does change the conversation. But like, man, that first time it was real hard to like have any of that.
Yeah. And um, being sort of exceptionally aware of like people on the internet are always like, I'm an empath. Like I can feel people's feelings usually pretty strongly. And the problem is that I don't always categorize them correctly. And so sometimes when I am around someone who is experiencing a great deal of emotion, you know, you ever turn music up so loud that it's not music anymore?
No, that's fucking crazy.
But like that's kind of what it's like sometimes, is that like all I'm getting is the presence of all of this emotion, but like I can't really understand what it is. And I think that it is naturally my inclination to assume that A, it's anger, and B, it's directed at me. And so, you know, I remember being in the car and coming back and like I said, kind of coming down from the thing, and being very aware, because I think you were sitting next to me, and being very aware that you were like amped. But the only way that my brain could label that, could like characterize that, was like, you're mad, and specifically at me. And in the context, it made a lot of sense to assume that you would be mad at me. And that's hard to process. That's hard to deal with anyway. I'm very bad at being sort of level when someone that I like a lot is upset with me. Especially this was pre understanding that I was autistic. So again, my context for this is that like just that there's something wrong with me and that it like makes me a bad person, and that you were mad at me because I'm engaging in this process of being a bad person. It's not like I have a personality disorder, you know what I mean? Or like something like a defined, you know, wiring issue, which like in retrospect, lol. But but you know, at the time I thought that like my brain works normally and like there's nothing wrong, quote unquote, with my brain. There's nothing like unusual about it. So all of this shitty behavior is just shitty behavior. This is just like temper tantrums and like me being a dick. And so to look at that and be like, I was a dick for a long time. She's mad at me because I was a dick. That makes sense. And also I suck. A, because I was a dick, but B, because you had to be very justifiably angry with me because of said dickness. So the whole thing compounds, you know? And then that ultimately leads around to like the next day like hangover that comes from a lot of really big meltdowns, where I just feel like a total shithead. You know, I'm just like so guilty and so like, I'm so sorry I was a giant piece of shit yesterday. I don't know what's wrong with me. Like, so having developed the awareness of my tism, of my autisticity, has given me at least a little bit of space to give myself a little bit of grace around it and be like, this is a mechanical process that I cannot control and that I can't help, and like it just is going to happen sometimes. There was another instance, it wasn't last year, it was the year before. We went to the Renaissance Fair and it ended badly, which was another like catastrophic. Yeah, it was another like catastrophic meltdown day for you boy here. And then I remember like getting home and like choosing to sleep on the couch, and like the next day I was just like, I was non-zero worried that you were going to dump me.
Which like I do feel bad about, but the difference between like that, or the time difference, I should say, what, like at least 2 years, 3
about
years?
2 years,
yeah, like it was a long time, and like you had been working on like sorting out, I don't want to say like just your
Everything.
bullshit, but like you're like figuring it out, and like doing that work alone, like it does deserve grace. And so I was proud of you, and like we were really working hard on communication, and like we had just like gotten the house like not too long before, like it was like that summer. And like it came out like as you getting pissed off at me for, I don't even remember what anymore, but like you just yelled at me, and I was like,
I do.
I am not fucking having it today. Like you can have your little temper tantrum. And I just like 180 about face and walked away from you, and it was like, no.
Yeah. So the context for the listeners, we went to our local Renaissance Fair, and it's out in the woods, as they typically are. And
what?
well, I mean, some of them aren't, but I've been to an outsized number of Renaissance fairs compared to the average person. So yeah, it's out in the woods, and there's like one road that goes to it. And so the problem here is that
Oh, that's not even why I was mad at you.
No, I know,
that
but
you still don't know.
No, but like this is where it starts. This is where the day starts, is what I'm saying. So like, this is kind of the context. So
Graham's painting the picture.
We
shut up.
we gotta drive like 45 minutes to get to this point. And getting to this point in the story, we've already been like sidetracked. There was the weird guy at the gas station who was like, no, you have to take this other route, like whatever, all of this weird shit. So the day is already like kind of tense. And the very short version is I make a mistake in trusting Google Maps that I can go this other way. And it turns out I can't go that way. So then we have to kind of come back through. Everyone in the entire state of Colorado is like sitting in dead standstill traffic. I mean, it takes us, at the time that I decided to turn off of the route we were on and follow this Google route, right? We were maybe 15 minutes from the Renaissance Fairgrounds.
Sure.
And then when we, at the end of this, misdirection on my part, we get back into all of the traffic in the entire world, and it takes us like another hour and a half probably to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. And this, to be fair, like I was not irritated about that, because I've been to the Ren Fair like 1,000 fucking times, and I said, just go that way. Second of all, there's a giant fucking sign that says Ren Fair this way. You would Michael Scott into a fucking lake for Google Maps, I swear to God.
It's an autistic thing to trust that authorities are authorities for a reason, and they know what they're talking about. So, but anyway, I was like, yeah, well, this is the Google route, so I'm going to go the Google route, whatever. Anyway, mistake made. So now we're going to spend an hour and a half sitting in basically like inching along dead standstill traffic, which is so stressful in and of itself. And I got her in the passenger seat, clearly pissed at me, which again is very hard for me to process. So I'm having a rough day to start with. Now, again, I don't want to be like, she's being a bitch about this. She was absolutely justified in being pissed at me. So I'm already walking into this thing at like 85% of my capacity, and then it's the Renaissance Fair. There's a ton of people. It's in the middle of summer. It's 256 degrees outside. And I don't deal well with heat. I've said many times before that anything above 71 degrees Fahrenheit is like painful for me. My bones start to ache. It's awful. So it's 100 degrees out, and we're just surrounded by so many people. There's so much conversation and so much like stimulus happening, right? And so I'm like, at this point, I'm like pushing the edge of the thing, the end of my envelope, as it were. And we go and get a couple of drinks or whatever. And what happened was you asked me like what I wanted to do or something like that. And I was like, I want to go like walk around. I want to, see the thing. And we didn't do that for some reason. I don't remember what it was. I don't remember if we were like waiting for your people to catch up or you wanted to see what they were going to do or something. I don't remember what it was, but
people were using the restroom.
Okay. But ultimately, I remember that I said in 3 separate instances, I want to go walk around and like see the, the fair. And then that wasn't what happened. We didn't do that. And that plus like there was weather off in the distance and there was like a funnel cloud forming.
Mm-hmm.
And my most like primal oldest like phobia terror is of tornadoes. And so seeing this thing, it was miles away. It was no danger to us at all. But seeing that thing was just kind of the cherry on top of the whole thing. And all this overstimulation built and built and built. And then I saw that thing and I was like, just my conscious brain was like, we're out. That's it. And shut down. And yeah, I do remember yelling at you. I do remember stalking off. And then I remember I didn't see you guys for most of the day. I did like 2 quick loops of the fairgrounds. Barely saw anything because I was like, nah. And then I went outside the fairground somewhere and I found like a spot under a tree where I sat for, I'm going to say 2 hours, just like regulating. And so this was not a good day for me. This wasn't a good day really for anybody, I don't think. But yeah, didn't end well. And that is, I think, the most catastrophic meltdown that I have had during our relationship. Yeah, that one really was really bad. And so having had it is good because now I have the, it gives me a little bit more kind of context on these things and kind of where they came from and everything. And yeah, we got back and I was like, I'm just gonna crash on the couch. And we woke up the next morning and I was like, so do I have to have my stuff out by like the end of the week or what's,
Uh-huh. And what did I say?
No.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what I mean is that like that kind of hangover after this incredibly bad meltdown is just like my guilt and shame about having had this thing happen. I think there's a lot of stigma around meltdowns that they're like childish or that they're temper tantrums, things like that. And the thing that I really want to underline is like, this is not like a temper tantrum is a choice, it's when you're 2 years old and you don't have any handle on your emotions, like they just happen, whatever. But like if you have a temper tantrum when you're a 43-year-old person, you're choosing to like, a substantial amount of that is like just letting it happen, is choosing to let it happen. But with a meltdown, I have no control over it. I don't even know it's going to happen most of the time until it's already happening. And like I said, at that point, my conscious mind is gone and I'm just an animal. So yeah, there's a lot of stigma around it, around like that kind of like childishness and everything. And I think that really powers a lot of my remorse about them after the fact. Is just being like, oh my God, I can't believe I acted like that. I didn't act like anything. You know what I mean?
I think I can only speak for myself, but I feel like some of the, it's childish and it's, like whatever immature behavior. Like I feel myself think those things, like if like we're in an argument or it's actively happening, because like you said, it is a choice. And I feel like trying to engage with someone in that state makes me choose to be in that state. And I'm the one throwing a tantrum. And then, like, that's like a whole cycle of like, I don't like this behavior for myself.
Sure.
And that's why, like, in that moment, like when we were at the run fair, I was just like, nah, fuck this. I'm going to walk away. I'm going to have a good time and like go sit under a fucking tree. I don't give a shit right now.
Yeah.
And like, maybe that's not the best way to do it, but like also I think you've done a bunch of work with self-awareness and both of us have with communication. Like we haven't found ourselves in that situation again, and I'm not saying like we won't, but hopefully if we do next time it will be easier. I think that is a little bit of like, you're making me feel like I'm throwing a tantrum, and like that part feels real bad.
Sure. It's funny that you mentioned that, you didn't handle it correctly, right? One of the things about meltdowns is that, like, because we're not in control of ourselves, because we're not doing something that we can stop or that we can even like kind of put brakes on, like, there actually are, I think, a lot of ways that like outsiders who know what they're doing and who are familiar with this and what's happening actually can be really helpful. But honestly, I think that the most effective thing is to just change that person's situation, and there was nothing you could do about that.
Mm.
Like, you couldn't make me stop being drunk. You couldn't make it stop being 100 degrees. You couldn't make me stop being surrounded by all these people. You know what I mean? So I had to physically withdraw from that situation to a place where it was quiet, to where it was cooler. I was sitting under the tree, where I could like kind of sober up a little bit, whatever, and like just kind of let the situation change around me. So like I read, I wanted to make sure that I really handled this one, um, correctly, I guess, as best I could. So I read a bunch of articles about, meltdowns and everything. And there's this there's this kind of nice being like, oh, like reading all these articles and being like, I knew all this. It's kind of nice, it's kind of affirming, I guess, to be like, I do understand these things that are going on in my head and the heads of others. But yeah, the suggestions that they give are always things like, speak like quietly and calmly to a person, and very often the advice is
Good luck with that when you're fucking furious with them.
right. The advice very often is don't touch us. It's
That makes
often
sense.
it's often like human nature, I guess, to like see that someone is upset and want to like to physically comfort them, to pat them on the shoulder, to hug them, whatever. And I think that sometimes it's more stimulus. That's just going to make things worse. And like, move someone into like a darker room or turn off lights, turn off any sound that, like control any sound that you can, and like reduce the stimulus, essentially. And in that situation, like I said, there was nothing you could do, so it was just kind of a perfect storm of like bad things. And honestly, that was, I don't, I don't recall there even being discussion about us going this year. And I honestly feel like a lot of that was like, let's not talk to Graham about going to the Renaissance Fair after a couple of years ago.
Well, also, like, both of these incidences happened with our same set
Yeah.
of friends, and it's like, well, okay, fool me 3
Yeah.
times, who's the asshole?
No, and I don't,
Like, these are not the situation to do.
right. I always feel like anytime they invite like us as a group to hang out, they're like, hey, Jen, you should come hang out with us. And I guess you can bring what's his name if you think he's going to be cool about it. And there's a point to which I can only have so many meltdowns around the same set of people who like I really only see in these kinds of scenarios.
Yeah.
I really only ever see them under these kinds of conditions, where at a certain point I'm like, I don't think that you're going to believe me that I don't want to hang out with you guys, but I can't hang out with you guys because we keep,
Well, that's not true. We've done like quieter things together.
Yeah.
It's just not probably not the Run Fair.
Yeah. Which sucks because I genuinely like it, but I think, I don't know, it's.
Is it too hot here? Do we need to travel for it?
Oh, it's so fucking hot here. It's atrocious. There's a part of me that thinks that I need to go to the fair by myself first. Right, like that I can go with you guys, but I got to go as a solo trip the first time. Like the experience of the Ren Fair that I want to have is not always the same as the one that you guys want to have, right? And that's part of the problem too, is that there's a little bit of tension there between like, for me, it's I don't always want to like go to the shows, or I don't care for a turkey leg. Like I just sort of like being in the ambiance of the place, and sometimes I would just go and like sit on a bench and just like people watch for like an hour or whatever, and I'm fine with that. And so I think that maybe if we try to make plans next year, that's what I'm going to do, is like, I'm going to go by myself the week before, and I'm going to like get all of that done, and try to like acclimate myself a little bit. And then when we go as a group, I can just like be cool about it. Maybe, I don't know.
Cool. Sounds like a great science experiment.
Hey, but you get the house to yourself for a few hours. I did want to cover the difference. There's sort of like a subtype of meltdowns called shutdowns, which are exactly what they sound like. We kind of go catatonic. We become nonverbal. We may just stare off into space and like not react to things that are around us. So the major difference between a meltdown and a shutdown is that a meltdown is external, is like outwardly focused, whereas a shutdown is kind of inward. It's the same kind of response. It's just kind of like where the focus goes, where the energy goes, I guess. I'm told that shutdowns can be scary because, again, you might be like having kind of like a charged conversation with someone. I mean, any time that we have ever had like a really emotionally charged conversation or an argument or whatever, there have definitely been times where I have like just shut off, and like stare into space, or sometimes I would like walk away, and like whatever else. And that's what it is. It's just these little like kind of shutdowns because I'm overwhelmed. And for whatever reason, I have this meltdown inwardly rather than outwardly. And so instead of like yelling at you or, throwing things or whatever it might be, I just shut off and like stare into space, and I think with those kinds of things, it's interesting because those are sort of like a series of like mini kind of meltdowns. I can continue this conversation, but I just need 20 seconds of like complete dissociation. I just need to not exist for like 20 seconds and like bleed off some of this tension. And then I'm going to come back and,
Which I have to say, like, I do my best to control it, but I do actually have like a really fucking bad temper. And when we're arguing, I am active aggressive. Like, I am not afraid of confrontation. And if I'm fighting with somebody, like, we are gonna fucking resolve it, or one of us is gonna die. Like, there is nothing in between. And so, like, not knowing that about you before and arguing with you, like, I would like fucking see red sometimes with that situation. And then even now still, like, I think we've only had one or two arguments where like it was kind of heated and like I did get mad, but like it didn't make me as mad as like before. We talked about it and I got some context around your behavior because I was just like, this motherfucker isn't taking me seriously and we have a fucking problem now. And now I'm like, all right, like he's fucking processing and he will say something when he's ready. And it's I say that not because like I want you to feel bad, but like if anybody's listening and they're in an argument with someone, I get frustrated sometimes because I feel like, oh, well, like I have neurotypical feelings, so they're not valid. And like it sucks to like, oh, I'm always taking a knee is kind of like how it felt in the beginning. And like, I don't know, just everybody gets frustrated.
Sure. And even, I mean, it is clear, I think, especially to listeners, it is clear just right now, just you talking about that you're a pretty intense person, especially when you are like, what I mean? Like, it's, it's not a value judgment or anything, just, you are. And
now imagine that coming at you full of rage.
Right. And so when you are energized about something, when you're passionate about something, you're an extroverted person anyway, and there are just these like waves of emotion that come off of you. And so now, and again, not a complaint or an attack on you as a person or anything. Now I have to process not only what you're saying and like the conversation we're having, but also being buffeted by this like miniature hurricane of, of anger and frustration and, and energy that comes off of you. And so that sometimes I think that is one of those things where like I could probably do one or the other, but not both at the same time. And so I just need to like process. And that's a really good point too. Not necessarily related directly to meltdowns and shutdowns, but like, we tend to process things a little bit differently. We don't, maybe not slower, but I don't know how to finish the thought that I'm having, but like that's
you processing?
Yeah. But that's exactly the thing is that like, I feel like if I ask you a question, you need like a second or two to give me the answer. You know what I mean? You need like a second. You might go, and then tell me. You might ask me a question and it takes me, especially in this kind of a context, it takes me 15 seconds before I can even find the answer. Part of it is like, I spend so much time second guessing like what you might actually be asking or what you might actually mean. And that's not a you thing. That's, I have learned to kind of process, neurotypical speech in that way where I'm like, okay, is the question you're asking me the one that you actually want an answer to, or is there like something behind that you're, stepping around or whatever? So I'm doing that fucking dance. And I'm also over here feeling like I'm in a wave pool and I haven't quite got my feet under me. And so like I need to let that extra tension bleed off and process my way through, like, here's this huge wave of emotion. I'm a deeply introverted person anyway, and so I don't have like a defense mechanism against that. So yeah, being introverted, being autistic and everything, like if we're having a conversation that's highly emotionally charged, I do need a lot of time to process like everything that you might say or everything that you might ask me. And again, we talked about this, this, but for the listeners, like it's not that I'm not taking you seriously. It's not that I'm not like, engaged with what you're saying, but I literally just my brain doesn't work that fast, or it doesn't work in that same sort of way. Yeah. Like I said, this is a tough one because I tend to be kind of an avoidant person in general, and I don't really like to relive all of these memories of these like, really bad meltdowns that I've had. It's taken me a really, really long time to come to the understanding that this is a defense mechanism, and it's an automated one. It's not I'm being an asshole. It's not that I have a terrible temper or whatever else. Like all of these things that I told myself were the reason for all of this. It's because like there's a pressure release valve in my brain that sometimes gets activated. I think for other people, that kind of pressure release valve can like bleed off the part that's too much. You know what I mean? You're at 108% and your brain can bleed off 10%. And you can be, kind of like back in the moment, whatever. But for me, it's like we're turning everything off and this has got to get to zero before, like the valve just opens everything and we just dump all of it. And, that'll come out as, even just sitting here, I have like calluses on my hands from lifting that I'm like tearing apart and my thumb is all fucked up. And even talking about this and like kind of reliving these moments, I'm just like,
you did a good job.
Thank you. But that's kind of my point, is that like being as aware as I have become about meltdowns has given me the ability to, like I said, give myself grace about it, to be kinder to myself about it, which is really important. And I think honestly, like until you as a neurodivergent person, as an autistic person subject to meltdowns, until you're able to frame it like that and understand that like there's not something wrong with you, you're not being a shitbag, you're not, choosing to be like this, that this is literally something that is unique to you. It is just how your brain works. It's a part of you, like being right-handed, or
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't call an epileptic person an asshole for having a seizure,
right?
so.
Exactly. Or you wouldn't call someone who has to use a wheelchair, you wouldn't call them shitty for not being able to walk. It's exactly the same thing. And I feel like that's kind of an overarching message that we maybe have in some of these episodes. It's just like, we are disabled, and however you might choose to feel about that, whether you choose to accept that label or not, we are. I think a lot of times the stigma around being quote unquote disabled is like something that you did, or it's something that's like a part of you that's like faulty or whatever. And the thing is that we're not disabled because we're inherently less. We're disabled because we live in a society that won't give us space to be who we actually are.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, if I can, if this is our final episode and I can ask people to take any one thing away from any of it, it would be that, is like, please try to figure that out and try to give yourself that kind of space, because it's so destructive to have these terrible meltdowns and then to compound that by like blaming yourself about it. And, and that's not to say that, you could have a meltdown and then do something really bad and like you wouldn't be responsible for it, whatever. Like that's a different animal, but I don't know. It's just, it's a hard subject. And like I said, I think it's one that I maybe was a little bit resistant to talking about, because sometimes we have these episodes where it's a lot more fun and it's a lot more sort of like lighthearted, about like, oh, my brain's just like weird. And it's like, kind of at right angles to yours in this way or whatever. And this is one of those things that's just like, this sucks. There's not an upside. This isn't
something you can file under like a cute meme about it being your superpower.
Yeah. Don't get me started. Yeah. So this is one of the things that's like basically just always negative.
In your research about meltdowns and like how to help people having them and all that kind of stuff, did you? Well, let me start at the beginning of my thought. Sorry. There is not an element of privilege to the shape of our relationship in regard to this because, like, if it were reversed, right, and I were the one having a meltdown and I needed to just go like sit somewhere by myself and look completely distraught, I think you would feel a whole lot different about me going off to do that in a place filled with strangers than I do when I'm like, yeah, go sit your ass down and like have your feelings because you are bigger than I am. You're more dude shaped. You are more, for lack of a better word, like threatening looking.
Sure.
And like, well, like if I had a girlfriend who was autistic and small and had a meltdown, I would never be like, go fucking cry by yourself over there. And I'd be curious to hear how people handle that because I feel like that is just so different.
It is, and without leaning too heavily on the button, my experience of being autistic is inextricably linked with everything else about me as a person, right? So my experience of being an autistic person is being a white, dude-shaped, as you said, sort of physically intimidating looking person. Yeah, I understand intellectually, like, it is a completely different experience for anyone who is even 1 degree outside of that, you know, because outside of the context of being autistic, like, my general personhood is basically the default in America, right? Like, society is designed to operate for the benefit and the comfort of people who look like me. If I woke up tomorrow and I was a feminine person, but everything else was the same, my experience would be different. If I woke up tomorrow and I was black, but everything else is the same, it'd be completely different, you know? So that is one of the things that I have been thinking about. I didn't really have like a note about it or like a point to make about it really, but just that, like, you know, if we were in a public situation and I were to have like a really outward meltdown and everything, how different it would be if I were not the person that I am or the person that I appear to be, you know?
I mean, I hope people, or specifically like women in public places that have had panic attacks and like there's no one else around, and like it's always in the back of your head, like, well, I'm glad I found this woman instead of a predatory creep or something. And yeah, I was maybe hopeful, like while you were doing your research, if there were any good tips specifically around that. If anybody has any, we would love to hear them.
Yeah, that would actually be great to be able to kind of like promote. But yeah, I'll drop in a couple of links when we make, you know, social media posts about this, but they're very broad, and they're just like, what is a meltdown, and like what is a meltdown versus a shutdown, and like those kinds of things. And kind of general resources. I don't have anything that's specific to people, again, who aren't, you know, who don't look like me. I think that it would be cool to be able to promote that a little bit and kind of pass that around and just make it available.
Yeah.
You know, every little bit.
Yeah. What else you got on your list of preparation and planning?
That's it. That's the whole thing.
We did it.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna go decompress for 45 minutes or so.
You want a drink with that?
I'm just gonna stare at the wall and not move for like 45 minutes. Try not to have any thoughts. Okay, yeah, that's all I had about that distasteful topic. So, thanks for joining us. Thanks for tuning in. I still have to say that, even though
I guess people still say it, right?
I think so. I mean, we still talk about ending a phone call as hanging up the phone, even for people who like have never actually done that, like the physical act of hanging up a phone, you know, still refer to it that way. So
how would you know?
Because I've seen it.
Where
else? Inside my head, where I make up all these scenarios on the internet. Inside my head, where I make up things that confirm my
I don't
biases.
think I've ever seen a young person say hang up the phone.
I don't know. Maybe I haven't. Maybe I just assume. Oh. Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Tune in is one of those things that I think people do still say, despite the fact that like there's not a tuner involved. It's not like a radio show. Thanks for streaming. Thanks for downloading this podcast if you've done that.
Hanging out with our bullshit.
Yeah. I never know how to fucking end these things.
I could tell.
Yeah.
All right.
Goodbye, audience. You can find us on social media on Instagram at idkwhatthatmeans.podcast. Or if you happen to be on Blue Sky, idkwhatthatmeans.bsky.social. Or you can contact us by email at idkwhatthatmeans.podcast@gmail.com.
We hope you have fun or learn something. Probably not both, but hopefully both.
Probably not both.
Anyways, thanks for listening to I Don't Know What That Means.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.